Section 11, Anti-Slavery and Abolition. The revivalist doctrines of salvation, perfectionism, and disinterested benevolence led some evangelical reformers to believe that slavery was the most God-defying of all sins and the most terrible blight on the moral virtue of the United States. While interest in abolition had existed for several decades, organized advocacy had been largely restricted to gradual emancipation, seen in several northern states following the American Revolution, and colonization efforts to remove Black Americans to Africa. By the 1830s, however, a rising tide of anti-colonization sentiment among northern free Black Americans and middle-class white evangelicals' flourishing commitment to social reform radicalized the movement and pushed the idea of immediate emancipation, immediatism, onto center stage. Inspired by a strategy known as moral suasion, young abolitionists believed they could convince enslavers to voluntarily release their enslaved laborers by appealing to their sense of Christian conscience. The result would be national redemption and moral harmony. They rested their mission for immediate emancipation upon the declaration of our independence and upon the truths of divine revelation, binding their cause to both national and Christian redemption. Abolitionists fought to save the enslaved and thereby save the nation. Figures like William Lloyd Garrison, the white abolitionist who established an anti-slavery newspaper called The Liberator in 1831 and the American Anti-Slavery Society in 1833, have most famously illustrated this transition toward immediatism and moral suasion. Yet it was an approach born out of the financial support of Northern freemen like James Forten, who financed The Liberator, and the intellectual work of Black activists like the 3,000 freemen who assembled in Philadelphia in 1817 to issue resolutions proclaiming their American identity and declaring themselves entitled to the same rights of white citizens. The racially integrated abolition movement was rife with racism and overwhelmingly relegated Black activists to a backseat role. Despite the popularity of moral suasion among white abolitionists, an alternative approach was steeped in calls for resistance and, if necessary, violence. David Walker, born free in North Carolina before moving north to Boston, published his famous appeal in IV articles in 1829. In this widely circulated pamphlet, Walker defended slave rebellions and believed that violent resistance might be necessary to end slavery and racial inequity. Henry Highland Garnet, who had escaped from bondage as a child, would make similar claims in a speech in 1843. Drawing on the legacy of the American and Haitian revolutions, in which the promise of liberty justified violent rebellion, he spoke to his enslaved brethren, "Strike for your lives and liberties. Rather die freemen than live to be slaves." Abolitionists collectively employed every method of outreach and agitation, establishing hundreds of anti-slavery societies. Harnessing the potential of steam-powered printing and mass communication, abolitionists blanketed the free states with pamphlets and anti-slavery newspapers. They blared their arguments from lyceum podiums and broadsides. Prominent individuals such as Wendell Phillips and Angelina Grimke saturated Northern media with shame-inducing exposés of Northern complicity in fugitive rendition, and white reformers sentimentalized slave narratives to tug at middle-class heartstrings. Women launched anti-slavery fairs to raise funds for the cause. Abolitionists used the U.S. Postal Service in 1835 to inundate Southern enslavers with calls to save their souls by emancipating their enslaved laborers. Turning to more explicitly political methods in 1836, they prepared thousands of petitions for Congress as part of the Great Petition Campaign. In the 6 years from 1831 to 1837, abolitionist activities reached dizzying heights. Such efforts encountered fierce opposition. Abolitionists remained a small, marginalized group detested by most white Americans in both the North and the South. Immediatists were attacked as the harbingers of disunion, rabble-rousers who would stir up sectional tensions and thereby imperil the American experiment of self-government. Particularly troubling to some observers was the public engagement of women as abolitionist speakers and activists. Fearful of disunion and outraged by the interracial nature of abolitionism, Northern mobs smashed abolitionist printing presses and even killed a prominent anti-slavery newspaper editor named Elijah Lovejoy in 1837. In a multitude of forms. Simple acts of resistance, such as breaking a hoe, running a wagon off the road, causing a delay in production due to injury, running away, or even pregnancy, provided a language shared by nearly all enslaved laborers, a sense of unity that remained unsaid but was acted out daily. A small number turned to armed rebellion. Nat Turner, leader of the deadliest slave rebellion in the antebellum South, found inspiration from religion early in life. Adopting an austere Christian lifestyle during his adolescence, Turner claimed to have been visited by spirits and considered himself a singular prophet whose visions encouraged him to do the work of God. As scholars have recently shown, however, his broader community, including women, formed an important backdrop for the work of resistance and rebellion. On the morning of August 22, 1831, in Southampton County, Virginia, Turner and 6 collaborators attempted to free the region's enslaved population. Turner initiated the violence by killing his enslaver with an axe blow to the head. By the end of the day, Turner and his band, which had grown to over 50 men, killed 57 white men, women, and children on 11 farms. By the next day, the local militia and white residents had captured or killed all the participants except Turner, who hid for weeks in nearby woods before being captured and executed. The White Terror following the Southampton Rebellion transformed Southern religion as anti-literacy laws increased, and black-led churches were broken up and placed under the supervision of white ministers. The hysteria prompted by the Southampton Rebellion created additional challenges for the abolition movement. White Southerners, believing that abolitionists had incited the rebellion, aggressively purged anti-slavery dissent from the region. Violent harassment threatened abolitionists' personal safety. In Congress, Whigs and Democrats joined forces in 1836 to pass an unprecedented restriction on freedom of political expression known as the Gag Rule, prohibiting all discussion of abolitionist petitions in the House of Representatives. 2 years later, mobs attacked the Anti-Slavery Convention of American Women, throwing rocks through the windows and burning the newly constructed Pennsylvania Hall to the ground. While many white abolitionists would continue to espouse moral suasion, black activists would increasingly turn to a politics of force, recognizing that non-resistance failed to protect black Americans or end chattel slavery. Section 12 Conclusion. The Age of Jackson ushered in sweeping changes. From the chaos of Jackson's cabinet emerged a new vision of executive power, one that prioritized personal and party loyalty, entwined populist democratic rhetoric with authoritarianism, and legitimized violence. The Jacksonian values that infused the Democratic Party were far from universal, however, and controversies over patronage, banking, tariffs, Indian removal, immigration, and the expansion of slavery in the new cotton economy ensured the emergence of an opposition party. In the wake of the Panic of 1837, the Whigs were poised to enter American politics as a force to be reckoned with moving into the 1840s.